welcome to SciLux, the podcast where we talk about scientific developments and technological changes in Luxembourg, which means we are proudly supported by Research Luxembourg and recording at the Media Center of the University of Luxembourg. And we have a University of Luxembourg researcher today. Our guest is Joëlla van Donkersgoed, who is a postdoctoral researcher at C2DH. I will not tell you what C2DH is because you should know by now if you listen to SciLux podcast. Joëlla holds a PhD degree in Cultural Heritage and Preservation Studies from the Art History Department at Rutgers at the State University in New Jersey, USA, as well as a bachelor's and master's degree with a specialization in public archaeology and archaeological heritage management from Leiden University, the Netherlands. Her PhD research focused on cultural heritage of the Banda Islands, Indonesia. Joëlla, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
So I guess listeners are already expecting we'll be jumping a little bit. We'll be a bit in Luxembourg, a bit in Europe, and then also, of course, Indonesia. I have to ask you about this, right? But right now we're starting with Luxembourg. Oh, I talked quite a lot already about public history here on the show, and I guess I hope that the listeners know a little bit, and they've listened also to Tina de Gent when she was here talking about public history too, but I still want to revise it a little bit. So I know maybe this is not the right question to start with, but I was still wondering, can all historical research be done with public history methods or not, and what are they?
Good question to start with. Yes, so the history of historical research, as you can say, was really about fact-checking and finding some kind of objective truth. And that is also the history that ended up in our education books, in our history books, presenting as if there is only one truth about the past. And I think that really the advantage of public history is that we can show that the past is not singular, that there are many voices, polyphocality, which is also something that Tina Gent addressed in her podcast. And I think that's really an opportunity to show that the past has different facets, different perspectives. So yes, I think that public history is kind of more of an addition to formal historical research because it gives more insight into the past and it gives more perspectives. So it is not something that one excludes the other, but it's more an addition to.
Which is a very nice interpretation. I think I like it a lot, but I also think that if you look at the history subject at school, as you mentioned, it would be very difficult to learn all the voices. And the teacher asks you, okay, what's the story of this? And you say, well, these people say that, and the historians say that, and we think this, right?
Yes, I actually think that we should do that because I think it shows that the history is still under research. And there is, of course, also the need still for historical research because historians have skills that people in the public might not have. How to read historical handwriting, for example, or the access to archives or how to interpret certain sources. However, I do think that it is important that if we look, for example, at war in the past, that there are different sides, that there are different reasons why people joined one side or the other. And I think that is important to learn and to understand because that will also help us understand how wars are happening today and to have empathy for the other side.
So does it mean public history is more about the contemporary history then? Or is it also possible to do public history about something that happened 300-400 years ago?
Yeah, I think that public history, and that's also where it connects to cultural heritage, is also very much focused on how the past continues to be present in the present. So how does it still have a value for our contemporary society? And I believe that that is really a big value of history, how it continues to have an importance to our society. And to understand that and to discuss that with people is what public historians do. And I think that's also where we have a value, that we can address new historical research and show people how that can also influence how the past is presented and understood in the present.
So we're talking about this term of shared authority. It's extremely difficult to share it with people, right? You go out to the public and you say, not, I know that's how it was, but what do you think, right? You have to kind of mediate it in some way. How difficult is it for you?
It is very difficult. And I think that's also because we have been taught also through the school system that there is an expert and that the other people who are not experts don't have anything to say about it. So sharing authority, it's not just about opening it up for different interpretations, but also engaging with people and empowering them to understand that their opinions matter, or their views matter, or their perspective of history matters. And I think that is also a process of unlearning, which we sometimes say, in which the public learns that their contribution matters. And I think one of our old projects from Historesch really showed that. We were looking for daily objects about the history of Esch, and we got very little responses. So it was quite hard for us to find people who wanted to contribute an object because they thought, my object doesn't matter. This is just a family object. And when we did the exhibition, where there were objects like a teddy bear, like a bicycle, which seemed to be regular objects, but by contextualizing them in a larger history, we showed them that these objects do matter. And your story about going to work every day on your bicycle shows an insight, a personal insight into history, and makes the history of Esch more approachable. So in that way, I think we, through this project, empowered people to also understand, like, hey, my story does matter. And a lot of people who came to the exhibition said, oh, now I understand what you were looking for. And I also have an object. And that is actually also what was very sad at the end of Historesch, which was focused on Esch, that the project was finished. And a lot of these projects, they last for 1-2 years, and then it's finished. And what do we do then? Then you finally got that trust, you built that relationship, and then it's over. And that's also kind of where the idea came for the current project that I'm doing, Historesch Gesinn, which is really trying to build a more sustainable platform where people can engage with ongoing historical research in Luxembourg.
And this is very, very important, because exactly we're talking about this platform that is supposed to stay, right? That even if you will not be there for the project, it's something that people will own. We go to ownership as well, right? First, you have to build the trust, but hopefully later on, it will somehow manage itself in some form. Okay, you mentioned Historesch, and of course, listeners, if you want to know more, that was a bit in the past, but I already interviewed Professor Thomas Covin, so there is an episode about that as well, you can check. But you smoothly moved to Historesch Gesinn, so we can actually jump right there. So the idea is to create a platform. What else?
Yeah, so it's not just a platform for C2DH. The aim is really to create a place where people can learn about ongoing projects in Luxembourg that has to do with the past. So we started with a collaboration with the City Museum in Luxembourg for their Urban History Festival, in which we looked at the history of the Bonneva neighborhood. And we're also doing a collaboration with the History Association for Kopstel-Bridel. So it's really a platform where anybody could contact us and say, hey, we have an idea for a project and we would love to do some crowdsourcing. We'd love to do some public history events, but we need some help of doing that. And especially in nowadays with data protection and setting something up like that costs a lot of time and energy and money, resources. And by creating something that is flexible, so we can launch new research themes, new research projects very easily, we can really make something that is sustainable, that can be used by our partners as well as by PhD students or other researchers at C2DH without having to set up all these administrative tasks.
But it also means that there are projects that are done by your researchers there, or not really?
Yes, there are. So for one example is the Magica project, which is a project by Veronique Faber, who researches the international and transnational history of the Schulbevoor in Luxembourg. And in her project, she encountered the Magician Club in Luxembourg, and they had a photo album with magicians, but some of them were unknown. So she came to me, she said, hey, regarding Historesch Gesinn, is there a way where we can show these pictures and ask people to identify the people or identify the places where they were? There's a button where you can report a photograph if you are depicted on a photo and you don't want it to be there, so you can report it. And then we developed an extra button where you can identify the people on the photos. So you can click on a face and then fill in the form like, number 1 is this person. And that was really, really successful, actually. In a way, we got a lot of responses on that, and it helped her to see who are these people, where were they coming from, and so that is one of the examples of how this platform is need-driven. So it's a researcher or an association that comes to me with an idea, and then we can develop that.
And how do you actually get known with the people? Because, okay, we are discussing now. I'm sure there'll be also people saying, I need to check it out. Maybe I have an idea. Perfect. We will also share all the links in the show notes. Don't worry. But, I'm just thinking, okay, maybe through the other projects, you're already kind of known in the circles. But still, I mean, it's a lot of work of just being out there and just waiting for someone to get to know you.
Yes. And I think that takes time as well. So it's also about now reaching different communities that are related to the specific research themes or the specific research projects. But it takes time to grow. And that's also where it is so important to have something that is more durable, more lasting, more sustainable. And as I said, it's also about finding the target groups for each of the research projects. So where are we hosting our events? Where are we looking for the people who know these magicians, for example? Veronique did a lot of advertising on Facebook groups of people who are related to this topic, and that's how we gained the engagement.
But it doesn't mean that you're actually hosting a Facebook group. As you mentioned, Facebook, so we have to say that, right? This is also the problem of the ownership, but on a different type of ownership, right? So just to take it out and make it sustainable this way too.
Yes. Exactly, because everything that you post on Facebook is owned by Facebook. And that was a problem that we had when we were doing Historesch, that we had a very active Facebook group and people would share things on it, but officially we're not allowed to use it. So by creating a website where we can do that crowdsourcing of photographs, we can ensure that we also have the rights to use those images.
Coming back to public history itself, when people are involved, people who are not specialists, they're amateur historians. I don't know if you should say amateur, but anyway, people who are not researchers at university, there's always a risk that they will have an interpretation of the past that is just incorrect. I mean, there are sources that confirm. What do you do with such versions of history then?
Luckily, we haven't really encountered very clashing things, and it really depends on the issue, I think. I guess it would come back again to the example of Historesch. There was one object that was mislabeled. So the use of that object was actually a different use and a different name. And we came across that when we were talking to other people who are experience experts. So those are people who have worked in the mines, for example. And they are expert in the knowledge of how to work in the mine. Me as an expert, as an historian, as a researcher, I would not know the jargon of working in a mine. And they were able to verify that. So in that way, it's also about maybe not only fact-checking with historical sources, but it's also fact-checking with the lived experiences of other people. So if one participant says one thing, you can also check with other participants if that is correct.
When you have so many different versions of the past, let's say, or so many different stories of the past, how do you tell it then? Okay, you're collecting all these objects or you're collecting stories and whatever, and then we are so much used to this linear telling of the past. How can you manage to get the polyvocality out?
Good question. So then I'm going to jump a little bit to my other project, which is about the Banda Islands in Indonesia. My book is coming out this year. And in the book, the first chapter, the first part of the book is about the histories of the Banda Islands. So it's plural because there are different perspectives, different histories that can be told. And the first part is about the pre-colonial history and is mostly focused on the oral history of the islands. And normally that history is told from the European perspective. So it's mostly of the European historical accounts of the Dutch East India Company. And then there is maybe a little part about, oh, by the way, there's also these oral histories that say something different. And what I try to do is to reverse that. So I have now written most of it based on the oral history, and then also a part about the European gaze. And then when I'm talking about the European gaze, normally it's the Dutch gaze because the Banda Islands were very important for the Dutch. However, there's also the English gaze and there is also the Portuguese gaze. And they all had different stories and different ways of narrating what happened on these Banda Islands. So in a way to try to interweave those things and also to interweave the oral histories with the historical accounts, and not just putting them side by side, but to show, okay, this is what happened according to the oral account, and this is what happened according to the historical account.
And that's in a book format, right? Because what I'm thinking as well is about the project by one of the researchers at C2DH, Dominique Santana, the website and this interactive documentary where you can kind of follow a path, right? And you choose, and then you can get the polyvocality through your clicks, let's say, which is also very interesting as an idea, right? I mean, C2DH does a lot of these virtual transmedia storytelling initiatives that I guess help with that polyvocality, right?
And that reminds me also a little bit about our other project, which was the Hear Here. So you can hear it here. And that is an audio tour that also allows us to have multiple stories from multiple people at one particular site. And that is also something that we would look forward to develop further on Historesch Gesinn.
Okay, just a small appeal, right? In case someone wants to tell stories, we are open. Are you focusing on certain parts of Luxembourg, or it doesn't matter? If someone has an idea, you're in?
If someone has an idea, please contact me.
Okay, perfect. Good to know. Heritage, it's also part of your studies, at least previously, but of course it intertwines a lot as well. And I noticed myself that it's one of those buzzwords that I know about, but I wouldn't be able to define it. So I know that you prepared a pub quiz question about it. And listeners, remember, answer only at the end of the podcast.
How do you define heritage?
So listeners, remember the answer only at the end of the podcast. Let's continue with Indonesia. So we have these different, as you said, we have European gaze, we have the histories. Why only now are you actually going and telling the pre-colonial history? What's the reason? Is it your own personal interest? Is it a good moment? Is it a trend maybe all over the world that it's kind of finally being told? My problem from a lay perspective is that somehow oral history always seems to me less, confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
Is that wrong to think?
Yes, those are great questions. So I think what is happening right now is that generally there is more understanding that history has been told from a certain perspective. And I'm talking not only about the colonial European gaze, but it's also that women are underrepresented in history, and that we are trying to see how can we show that history is more complex and more inclusive than we think. So that is a general trend in historical research across the world for sure. And I think that is also playing because our world is getting smaller. So we are engaging with different people more than we did in the past. Now, regarding oral history, I think there is definitely this trend in historical research for a long time, as I said before, about finding this objective truth. However, I think that we should realize that every history was written down with a specific agenda. So every history is kind of biased in one way or another, because you want to write something down in a way that is good for you, that presents the Dutch East India Company in a positive light, for example. And therefore, I think that historical accounts also have to be criticized. And the same way that also oral histories, they are written down or they are passed down with a specific purpose. And often that is more a moral of a story than that it is about exact dates and exact facts. And that is maybe our academic way of looking at history. We want to have the numbers and we need to make sure that the numbers align. But I think it's also about finding that oral histories are complementary in that way, because they are addressing the past in a different way, in a more emotional way maybe, or in a way that transfers a moral of a story that can show a different side of the story rather than fixing on those specific dates.
It's great that you mentioned the dates, because that's a problem for sure with I probably will not pronounce it correctly, sorry, Indonesians. Hikayat Lonthoir?
Lonthoir, yeah.
Lonthoir.
Lonthoir, yeah.
Lonthoir, okay, almost. I remember I was reading some article that you wrote that the dates don't match, right, if they are there at all. Right. And that, of course, for a European eye is like, that's not really good to use for history. Mm. So is that why it's been disregarded to tell the history of Banda Islands?
Well, this oral account was actually unknown until a couple of years ago. So we knew that it existed, but it got lost, the written record of this oral history. And it was recently found back in the National Maritime Museum in Amsterdam when we were preparing for a photo exhibition of a friend of mine, Isabel Boon, and it's called I Love Banda. And it's about how it is to grow up in the Banda Islands amongst all these colonial remnants. So they found this manuscript and they were like, can we exhibit this, but we cannot read it. What is it about? So I researched the manuscript, and it was very apparent from the beginning that most of the manuscript is set in a time that is pre-colonial. Well, when we talk about the Banda Islands, it's always about the colonial violence that the Dutch East India Company and Jan Pieterszoon Koen committed there. But it actually is about the time before and the long history of the Banda Islands. And the only moment when dates are mentioned is when these European merchants appear, the Portuguese first and then the Dutch. And it seems very forced because the entire manuscript is in narrated form. So it starts with, at that time, kind of like our European fairy tales. It's like once upon a time. So it's set in distant time without naming what time that is, because that's not important to the story. The story is about the characters and why they did certain things, that Islam came to the Banda Islands, how it came to the Banda Islands, that the religion is so important in society, which it still is. So it shows these connections that are important. Well, those are threads that are not mentioned in colonial history at all, or very rarely. Yeah, so in the end, you see that the dates are inserted in a very forced manner, and then these dates don't match. So yeah, as a historian, you would say, it's not correct. But I think it is more of a way in which they wanted to validate that their history is true, that they were trying to write down these oral histories in a way that it would be acknowledged by the colonial reader as a history, because without dates that would not maybe be considered a history. So I think it is in a way for an effort for them that they wanted to validate their oral histories as history. And it's been very interesting, actually, that now that we made a very high quality copy and brought it to the Banda Islands and to the various communities. And it has really sparked a revival of interest in this history, because before, when it was still told, they said, it's just a story. It's not real history, because history is what is written down. And it was a bit frustrating when I was doing my fieldwork about my PhD research that I kept hearing that. But now that it is written down and now that I have this copy, all of a sudden it's true. Now it's something that they can refer to, and there is something that has a validation mark in some way. And I guess it's in the same kind of process that we saw in Historesch, that, this is just my story. It doesn't matter, until it was in the exhibition and contextualized as by historians and validated. So I think that is where the public historian has a task to help people to empower the people to validate their historical. One of the questions actually that we did in a public event was, how do you think did it affect you? Was it in a positive, negative, or neutral way? And it was about the deindustrialization of this area. And we would think that everybody would say, it's negative, because that's kind of what we all think about, the deindustrialization, the jobs went away, and it would have negatively impact their family. But a lot of them said it was in a positive way, because it created upward mobility for their family, or it was less dangerous work that they are doing right now in their family than when they had to work in the heavy industry. So it was quite interesting to see, and I think that is also again the opportunity to show these multiple perspectives, and not that you're only talking to one very vocal person who knows about the history and include that in your book, but really talk to multiple people and have those different experiences and include them.
And also, the contextualization, as you were saying, and this whole idea of victimizing, let's say, the people from the Banda Islands as the victims, only that version is not okay either, right? Because it's just taking away the agency that is so important.
Exactly. And that's something that I see a lot in the Netherlands. Like when the case study of the Banda Islands come up, it often refers to 1621, when Jan Pieterszoon Koen, who was a general at the Dutch East India Company, annihilated the population. And in the Netherlands, in the public debate, it's a very important case study to talk about Dutch colonial history, what the atrocities were that happened in that time, and how the Netherlands nowadays has a lot of wealth that came from that time period, and that we need to deal with that we need to face that we need to acknowledge that. And that's a very important process that is happening in the Netherlands. However, that is a process that is happening in the Netherlands. And in Indonesia, it's completely different, because for the local community, this part of the past is a time in which their islands were coveted by the entire world. Everybody wanted to have their nutmeg, their spices, because they were so precious. So their islands, which are now remote and forgotten, played a very important part in world history. So for them, it's a history that they are proud of. They are proud that their ancestors fought to keep the islands, to keep the trade, that they resisted the Dutch, and that the Dutch really had to fight really hard. And in the Dutch imagination, the Dutch came and we just wiped everybody out. No, there was fierce resistance, and the culture that was there still is there today. So they are resilient. The Dutch are no longer there, but the Bandanese are. So there is a lot of pride in this history. I think that if you only talk about the Bandanese as victims, you're taking away that pride, and that's also colonial in a way, because you're pushing them down, for your own agenda.
So take me back to the first time you went there. Like, how did you feel yourself? Because that's also very interesting, because in both cases, both doing public history in Esch and doing public history there, you're an outsider, but a different type of outsider, right? Because here you also have to deal with your own country's colonial past. So you naturally are going there a bit, how do I start, right?
Yes, positionality is super important as a public historian to reflect on that. And thank you for bringing that up. Because when the first time that I came to the Banda Islands, I felt really heavy. I was like, oh no, I'm just going to introduce myself as a student from America, So I happen to be Dutch, but I'm from America. But it was really strange for me in the beginning to hear that people really embraced me because I was Dutch, because we have a shared language a little bit. The local language still incorporates a lot of Dutch words. So that was one way to make friends, that you're like, oh yeah, we're walking on the straat, the streets. And it was something that we connected on. And I thought it was very surprising, because I thought I would have to hide away my identity in a way, or suppress it a little bit. But it was actually something that they find very interesting, because there are also a lot of gravestones, for example, that have Dutch text on it that is in their backyard, and they don't know what it says. And then they're like, oh, come. Can you please read this to me? Can you translate this to me? So it was also a way that we were able to engage and connect. And yeah, that was a bit surprising to me in the beginning. But yeah, I was really embraced by the community very quickly. Yeah.
That's really good to hear. Exactly counterintuitive, I would say, in some way, right? Which also reminds us that you just sometimes should go for it, because the assumption, the other, that we don't want to cross the bridge because, we don't know what's going to happen. No, it's just, you just go for it. Absolutely. What about the community itself? Because you also mentioned, I know comparing Esch and Banda Islands is a bit of a crazy idea, but in general, still human beings, right? So is there something about being more prepared for doing public history? Are the communities, not only those two that you've done, that you would consider that are just more, I don't know, have some preconceptions that help you doing your work? Or how does it look? Can you overgeneralize at all?
I think one aspect that I want to reiterate again is trust, and building trust, which is very important. So the first time that I came to the Banda Islands, I was considered one of the foreigners. There's a lot of tourism that come there, a lot of Dutch tourism. And for them, the Dutch colonial past and the Dutch tourists that come there are separate things. So they say Jan Pieterszoon Koen was a horrible man, and they hate that guy. But that doesn't have to do with the Dutch people who come nowadays, because they're very kind and they spend money and they engage and they're kind. So for them, it's a very different thing. But yes, it takes time to build the trust. And I think that's also what was the same in Esch, actually. So when I arrived in Luxembourg, I wanted to live in Esch because that was where the project was. And I think it's important to be part of the community that you want to work with, especially if it is a smaller community. And it just takes time to build that trust. So the first time that I came to the Banda Islands, I was one of the foreigners, one of the tourists. And I've been coming there now for 10 years. And now I'm part of the imagined community. So it's the diaspora. There's a lot of people who don't live on the Banda Islands that are considered part of the larger Bandanese community, because there's a lot of people who work elsewhere. And that is really what I think is important as a public historian, that it's not just extractive, but that you are also investing in a community and giving back. And when I started living here in Esch, it really was an important part also to just walk down the street and to engage with the people, with the shops around us, and to become part of the Harmonie des Mineurs and to support that local mining history and culture that is still existing in Esch today. So it's not only about asking people to give you information, but it's also about returning and the time and effort that you are asking people to put in your research.
We're speaking in Luxembourg, so classic Luxembourg question. How much is it about the language?
Great question. So I'm very aware of the languages here in Luxembourg, and I think it's really a challenge to see how can we make public history in a way that multiple languages are part of it, because language is such an important part of how to express yourself, and it makes you either uncomfortable or comfortable. I think in Luxembourg here, French is, for example, very much an administrative language, and people express their thoughts and feelings more in Luxembourgish, which is more of the spoken language. So it's very important that when we were developing all the projects that we do it in as many languages as possible, because a language is both including as excluding people. Therefore, our website is, for example, in 5 languages. So it's in German, French, English, Luxembourgish, and Portuguese. It opens in Luxembourgish, which also, there's not many Luxembourgish websites actually, which is also hard because how do you spell Luxembourgish? There's so many different varieties. It's a challenge, but I think it's also really important because it invites people to speak their thoughts in the language that they feel most comfortable. And building trust is also about feeling comfortable with one another.
Yeah, but then, building trust on a website is one thing, but going out there, you as a historian, and trying to build trust when, that language question comes up is very difficult. Have you ever done any public history in your own country, actually?
I have done public archaeology. So when I was doing my bachelor and master's degree, I was doing open days to invite people to learn about archaeology and the archaeology that we were doing. So I did a couple of those kind of public events. But yeah, it's actually quite funny because then after the master, I moved to the United States and worked in Indonesia. And now I'm working in Luxembourg. Yeah.
Yeah, that's also, I guess, maybe an interesting question on its own, right? Because maybe if you share the past because you are from the place, then you are too emotionally connected to it. Maybe it's better to be a bit of an outsider. I don't know. Just wondering, that it's also the same with Thomas Cauvin, that he's done public history in loads of places, right? So maybe there is something about it that helps you. I don't know.
I think it is partly because I come from a small Christian conservative town, and growing up, I did not know the history about the Banda Islands. And, though it was quite nationalistic way in which I learned about history. And by moving away from that place, by moving to the United States, I learned about, it really opened my mind and my eyes. And I think going back to the Netherlands now, I have, of course, done some interviews and things like that. I think it is a way that I learned to look at history in a more broader way than the way that we have been raised in the country. Jan Pieter Zoon Koen was one of our national heroes. And
is it still?
It is very much shifting in the last 10 years, I would say, especially the last 5 years. But there's still infrastructural projects like the Koen Tunnel. There's a lot of things that are still named after him. There's still a huge statue in the town that he was born on the main plaza to showcase how, the hero of the town. And there's still a lot of debate around whether that statue should be there or should it be moved. Because, he was the founder of Jakarta, which is was called Batavia at that time. And therefore, he did bring a lot of riches. And that was the part of history that was always highlighted, and the negative was always shoved under the rug. And I think that's really flipping at the moment.
So what we're talking about is shifting the focus, but not rewriting the history, right? Or should we rewrite it? Like, let's just completely burn all the history books and rewrite it anew, because now we know how it should be.
Now we know how it should be. I have many ideas about how history could be taught. I think there's different ways of doing it, and it would be really interesting project actually to write a new history book that is more thematic than that it is chronological, for example, so that we talk first of agriculture, for example, and how it developed in the Levant, and then to make it show also how these developments came to the country where we are in right now, and that it's not just about the central for Western Europe history, but that all these things have a very much deeper history, and to show that lineage, I think that would create a more maybe empathic and inclusive history that for our globalized world, because we are living in a world that is much smaller than when these history books were first written.
It reminds me of a book that I read. I don't remember the author. I will share the link in the show notes. The title is The Knowledge, and the idea is exactly, okay, we wake up one day, whatever was there does not exist anymore, and we have to redo everything from scratch, right? And there's a problem about it, because we just take everything for granted, first of all, like electricity, like we saw right now in Spain and Portugal, right? Suddenly everything doesn't work, like simple things even. Internet is there at the tip of your hands. You just take something, you can get knowledge everywhere, right? And here, okay, now you need to grow food. I mean, I am not a farmer by my background. I would not be able to grow certain things, right? And at certain moment, we will not have it anymore. So as you say, if you do agricultural kind of contextualization, you will at least be able to make those links. Or, okay, we don't have this, but we could go back to this simple way of doing it, right? Which I completely, in my head, I don't have it sorted like that.
Yeah. And it's really a problem in a way that we have been taught in a certain way. It was something that I was confronted with when I started teaching here in Luxembourg. I was doing a art history and critical visual analysis class, and we did a survey of art history. And art history is also, quite biased, but we try to do it more in a more inclusive way, also incorporating female artists and non-Western art. And one of my students came to me and she's like, the issue is I'm doing a bachelor here in European cultures, and I only learn about Western Europe. And also in your course, we're only talking about Western Europe. And I'm like, you are so right, because that's how I was taught. I was taught that is the most important art. And I actually don't know about the rest of Europe in that in-depth way, only in how it influenced Western Europe again. So when I developed the next course, a journey through Europe, history and its heritage, I made sure that every class we went through a time period. So we would start with prehistory and we ended with contemporary. And every time we would go to a time period, and every class, I would discuss an example from Northern Europe, Southern Europe, Western Europe, and Eastern Europe. And preparing that class, it just really made me realize the bias that I have, that how much knowledge I don't have. But it was really interesting to do it in that way, because it really forced me to think creatively. And I think it was also good to show that, we should talk about this. In the first class, we talked about how do we see Europe and how do we divide, where does West and East end? And that all of these things are perceptions.
It's so interesting, and it also reminds me of one of those, barbecue discussions I tend to have in Luxembourg. And what I want to finish with today is just one more thing that we did not discuss, is uncertainty. So how do you actually manage to, or should you communicate uncertainty in history or not?
I think we should embrace uncertainty, because the past is uncertain. In a way, the only certainty that we have is how the past still continues to be present in the present, because we cannot fully reconstruct what happened in the past. The only thing that we have are certain accounts or certain deliveries, like oral histories that have been preserved, and we can reconstruct partly what that means, but mostly how it still continues to influence our society and what matters. I think that embracing uncertainty is an important aspect in history, because it shows the politicality, it shows inclusivity, and it shows the opportunities and the challenges for further research, and also how to include the public.
as we are slowly wrapping up, it's the time to actually solve the pub quiz question. And remember, the question was not easy this time, but very important to discuss. So can you remind us, Joëlla, what the question was and then tell us the answer?
So the question is, what is heritage? And it's actually a concept that has been developing a lot over the years. In the beginning, it was very much focused on material heritage, like the Taj Mahal and the Seven World Wonders, and preserving that heritage as authentically as possible. However, especially in the last decades, the concept has grown quite a lot. So it includes cultural heritage and natural heritage. And natural heritage, you can think of parks. And then cultural heritage is then again divided into intangible heritage and tangible heritage. And tangible heritage are those monuments that we discussed. But intangible heritage includes oral histories, as we talked a lot about, but also cuisine and parties, festivals, and all those kind of cultural traditions that are also part of our heritage. Then we are talking again about boxes, like we're putting heritage all in these kind of defined boxes. However, there is also an overlap. So between natural heritage and cultural heritage, if you think about the gardens of Versailles, is that natural heritage? Is that cultural heritage? It was very man-made, but it's also about plants. Or we're thinking about different kind of, there's a lot of parks that, I'm so sorry for the pronunciation, the Uluru Mountain in Australia, which has a very big significance for the Aboriginal people. And therefore it is considered now both cultural and natural heritage because it's a natural feature, but because of all those symbolic meanings for the Aboriginal, it is also considered a cultural site.
And I'm pretty sure this is a subject that we could continue for another 50 minutes to discuss, because what I'm thinking of is, preserving heritage. What does it really mean, right? And when is there this person in the city that says, you can't destroy this because it's our heritage? And when they say that's fine, right? Because there is a bit of a problem with the natural heritage that we kind of destroy it. Not kind of, we destroy it way more, because we think more about monuments and buildings to preserve. And where's the line? And all the things I could ask you, actually.
And actually, also, if you're talking about preservation, it connects again to our conversation about what is history. We have this idea that history is stationary, but it's also something that constantly develops, like depending on our contemporary society or on our insights and how. So that is also the case with heritage. Heritage traditions, they are not stagnant. They have developed over time. Back in the day, the Ginster Festival in Luxembourg was not on motorized vehicles parading through the town. So there's a development in traditions, and I think there's some people think, I need to preserve. It needs to be original and authentic, but authenticity is also therefore a flexible thing that develops.
Yeah, and actually that makes me very excited about history. That was not always the case for me in the past. So thank you for introducing that as well. And listeners, remember just to check what Joëlla is doing and see to the age as well. There's a lot to see and to visit and to participate in. So keep them on your radar. Thank you so much, Joëlla, for coming today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And this is it for today. Don't forget to subscribe, to follow us. We are present on all the social media, everywhere you can find us. We are there. Suggest guests as well. And this was Silex, and my name is Hanna Siemaszko.